First, the shock. A screech of screws. A heave. The mirror slides free. Behind it, not plaster. Bricks. Fresh compared to the rest. A wall that shouldn't be there. Freeze that moment. Rewind. The day began with a heavy envelope. Cream paper. Wax crest. His name written in an elegant hand that didn't belong to the century. Nikita Koval almost tossed it with the flyers. Then he felt the weight. Opened it. Read the notarized lines twice. Inheritance. A mansion no one in the family spoke about above a whisper. The old place near the woods. The one tied to rumors and silences. At the notary's office the air smelled like dust and ink. A tired man slid a small wooden box across the desk. Inside, 2 iron keys, long and ornate, heavy as secrets. He recited the facts: southern edge of the city, beyond the warehouses and fields, taxes manageable, no liens, full responsibility on the air. Then, softer, your great-grandfather didn't like changes. You'll see. The road narrowed as industry thinned. Warehouses. Then empty lots. Then a dark belt of trees. The gates appeared, tall wrought iron with a faded crest welded in the center. The lock resisted, then surrendered with a hollow clack, like a throat clearing after years of silence. The drive was overgrown. Gravel swallowed by weeds. Branches arched overhead and stole the afternoon light. When the trees broke, the house stood up all at once. 3 stories of stone and brick, stern and towering. Slate-capped turrets at the corners. Windows reflecting sky like cold eyes. He parked at the steps. The air tasted of damp leaves and old fabric. The front door was oak, thick, stubborn. The iron key turned with effort. The sound rolled through the house like thunder. Dust rose to meet him in the great hall. A ragged runner swallowed his footsteps. Overhead, a chandelier hung tired but defiant, crystals the color of smoke. Faded frescoes lingered on the ceiling, angels worn down to weather and light. Then he saw it. The mirror on the southern wall. Huge. Wider than a doorway. Taller than any man. A frame so dark it might have been black, laced with gilt vines that curled into tiny hidden faces, sorrowful, mocking, alive. The glass held a film of time, yet it reflected true. And still it felt wrong, like it noticed him back. Nikita stepped closer. Breath held. Fingers out. Touch. Smooth. Not cold. But he pulled away as if the surface might ripple. He walked the house to distract himself. A kitchen with a broken spine of floorboards. A library whose shelves were stripped. Bedrooms where curtains had thinned to threads. Silence settled in corners like ash. Yet every hallway curved back to one thought: the mirror. Not decoration. Center of gravity. By dusk he stood before it again. Sunlight edged the frame with fire. His reflection stretched, minutely warped, as if the glass bowed inward. A trick of the hour, he told himself. The skin along his arms disagreed. He locked up at last. Stepped into the cooling evening. Looked back. The turrets cut a black shape against a copper sky. Driving away, he caught the mansion in his rear view, still as a held breath. It felt less like a gift than a dare. That night the thought returned in loops. The keys. The crest. The faces in the carving. The way the room seemed to orbit that single object. In the half-sleep between plans and shadows, he could almost hear a sentence forming behind the glass. Not a mirror. A cover. He didn't know what it hid. He only knew this. Whatever waited behind that surface had been meant to stay unseen. And it had finally found someone who couldn't look away. Engines roared at dawn. Metal clanged. Voices echoed. For the first time in decades, the mansion was awake. Trucks rolled up the drive carrying lumber, pipes, and scaffolding. Workers shouted measurements through the dust, boots crunching on gravel. The air that had lain still for half a century now vibrated with motion. Yet one space stayed untouched, the great hall. They avoided it instinctively. The carpenters started in the kitchen. Electricians mapped the servant corridors. Painters stripped the outer shutters. But no one stepped beneath the chandelier or near the southern wall where the mirror stood. When Nikita asked why, they shrugged. The floor's soft there. Too dark. Later, boss. Only one man dared to speak honestly. Harris, the grey-bearded foreman, skin the color of oak dust. He wiped sweat from his brow and muttered, "That mirror feels wrong." like it's looking back. You can pay me double. I'm not touching that wall. Nikita laughed, but it was forced. He wanted to call them superstitious, yet every time he passed the hall, a prickle crawled up his neck. The glass seemed to breathe with the light, bright at noon, dim by dusk, never quite still. By the second week, restoration had rhythm. The roof stopped leaking. New beams crossed the attic. Pipes hissed with running water for the first time in generations. But at night the noise returned, soft knocks, measured and patient, always from the same direction. One evening he followed the sound, lantern in hand. The hall lay still, but the air was colder there, thin enough to sting the lungs. His reflection wavered in the mirror, stretched by the flickering light. Somewhere behind the wall, something shifted, a creak, faint but deliberate. He stepped back. The lantern trembled in his grip. "Old wood," he whispered. "That's all." But the house didn't agree. The next morning he dug through the notary's packet, searching for the property plans. One detail froze him, the southern wall drawn twice as thick as the others, annotated in faded ink, untouchable. D. Koval. His great-grandfather's initials. That night he sought out the caretaker, the stooped old man who tended the gates. The caretaker's eyes clouded with memory. "Your great-grandfather spent nights in that hall," he rasped. "Sitting by the mirror with the doors locked. He said he was watching over something. Or maybe keeping it in." Nikita drove back through the fog, heart pounding. The mirror filled his thoughts, its carved faces twisting in his imagination. The house groaned as the wind pressed against it, boards whispering like words he couldn't quite catch. By midnight the decision was made. He couldn't stand another day of guessing. Tomorrow, when the workers left, he would do what no one in his family ever dared. He would pull the mirror from the wall, and finally see what the house had been hiding all these years. The workers left before sunset, their engines fading down the road until the silence returned, dense, waiting. Nikita stood alone in the great hall, crowbar in hand, eyes fixed on the mirror. The last light of day trembled on its surface. For a moment, he saw his own reflection, then thought he saw another face behind it. A trick of the glass, perhaps. Or not. He swallowed hard and stepped forward. The mirror was heavier than he had imagined. The bolts that held it to the wall were sunk deep, fused with time and rust. His first push barely made it creak. Sweat gathered along his temples. He braced the crowbar under the edge, pressed his weight, and heard the old wood groan like something waking from a long sleep. Crack. One bolt snapped. The echo rolled through the hall like distant thunder. He froze, listening. Nothing. Just the whisper of his own breath. Another push. Another crack. The frame shifted slightly, scraping against the plaster. Dust fell like grey snow. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Show me." When the last bolt gave way, the mirror tilted forward, a dark monolith sliding toward him. Nikita caught it just in time, guiding it down onto a canvas he had spread on the floor. It landed with a muffled thud. The glass stayed whole. He exhaled shakily, hands trembling. Behind it, not plaster, a wall of bricks, newer than the rest, pale and uneven, laid by someone in a hurry. The realization struck like a pulse in his throat. Whoever built this had meant to hide something fast. He set the lantern on the floor. Its glow painted the bricks in gold and shadow. The mortar was soft, crumbling. He raised the hammer. The first blow echoed like a drumbeat. Dust burst into the air, coating his lips with grit. Another swing. Another. Chips fell. Cracks widened. Then a brick gave way entirely, tumbling to the floor and rolling into the darkness. Cold air poured out of the gap, dry, stale, and metallic, with a faint scent of something ancient. He coughed, waved the dust aside, and peered in. A narrow passage extended beyond the hole, no wider than his shoulders. Stone walls. Darkness without depth. His pulse thundered in his ears. He should have stopped, but curiosity had already won. He widened the hole, dragging bricks out one by one until he could squeeze through. The lantern barely fit beside him. The space pressed close, air thick and unmoving. Each step scraped stone against his boots. At the end stood a door, wooden, warped, iron-banded, with a latch half rusted away. When he touched it, the latch crumbled like dry bread. The door creaked open. Lantern light spilled into a small chamber. A table stood at the center, draped in dust but perfectly arranged. paper scattered as though someone had left in the middle of work. Shelves along the walls held books, jars, boxes, everything preserved in a film of age, untouched. Nikita stepped in slowly. The air was cold and smelled of paper, oil, and time. A single chair rested beside the table, pushed slightly back. The scene felt too natural, too recent, as if its owner had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal. He brushed away the dust and saw initials stamped in gold, D.K. His great-grandfather's. His throat tightened. He opened it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words remained, hurried, obsessive, written in a hand that seemed to tremble with urgency. Names, dates, sketches of men, places, symbols, notes about meetings after midnight, about voices near the gate, about papers that must never leave these walls. The last page stopped him cold. The handwriting wavered, letters jagged. They are watching. I hear them in the halls at night. If this room is ever found, may truth survive where I could not. Nikita's fingers shook as he lowered the journal. The lantern flickered. The shadows deepened around him. The mirror, the wall, the silence of decades. They weren't just about secrecy. They were protection. He turned toward the passage, ready to leave, but something in the dark seemed to breathe behind him. He spun, heart hammering, but the room was still. Only the chair moved, ever so slightly, as if someone invisible had just stood up. By the time Nikita stumbled back through the broken wall, the night had deepened into silence so thick it rang in his ears. Dust clung to his hair, his hands, his lungs. The lantern flickered weakly beside the fallen mirror, its light shivering across the hall. He stood there for a long time, trying to convince himself that what he'd seen wasn't real. A secret chamber. Journals. The voice of a man long dead, whispering from paper. But the smell of the old air still clung to his clothes. The words still burned behind his eyes. The next morning, sunlight did nothing to clear the weight in his chest. Workers arrived as usual, loud, careless, alive. They hammered and shouted, filling the mansion with the noise of the present. Yet the great hall remained untouched, the mirror lying face down on its canvas like a fallen sentinel. When they asked if they could move it, Nikita snapped, no. His voice came sharper than he intended. The men exchanged uneasy looks and left the hall alone. Later that day, he drove into the city, the journal locked in the glove compartment. His hands gripped the wheel too tight. Every traffic light seemed too long, every glance from a passing driver too curious. He found a quiet cafe on a narrow street and spread the old pages before him. The ink was brown and brittle, the script disciplined at first, then unraveling into frantic notes. His great-grandfather had written about people of power, businessmen, judges, politicians, meetings in unmarked offices, cash in envelopes, disappearances that never reached the newspapers. Each page was a thread of conspiracy woven into the city's foundations. The same surnames still carved on banks, hospitals, street signs. Nikita flipped to a page dated the year his ancestor died. The words were uneven. If I speak, I vanish. If I stay silent, they win. Truth must be sealed where time can guard it. He looked around the cafe. No one was watching. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on his back. That evening, he noticed it. A dark sedan parked near the edge of the estate. It didn't move when he drove past. The windows were black mirrors, reflecting only trees and sky. When he returned an hour later, it was gone. The following night, it came back. Sleep fled him. He lay awake in the guest house, listening to the wind. Then came a crunch on the gravel outside his window. Slow. Careful. He grabbed the lantern and opened the door, but the yard was empty, just moonlight spilling over the grass. The forest whispered, nothing more. Still, the fear stayed. It followed him into daylight, into every glance over his shoulder. Inside the mansion, he spent his hours in the hidden room. The diaries multiplied on the table like ghosts crowding in. Some pages described shipments hidden in plain sight, artworks that were never sold, factories that existed only on paper. Others spoke of corrections, coded lists of people erased from records. Nikita realized what his great-grandfather had done. The man hadn't been insane. He'd been documenting a network so vast it could have swallowed him whole. And it probably did. Every creak of the floorboards above made Nikita flinch. Every gust of wind against the shutters felt like breath at his neck. Yet he couldn't stop reading. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. These names still ruled the city. Their descendants sat in boardrooms, their faces on campaign posters, their money greasing the same machine. One afternoon, while turning the fragile pages, he found a torn letter written but never sent. The ink was smeared by what might have been rain, or tears. Silence is survival. To speak is to disappear. The words chilled him more than the cold air. Now he understood the mirror's purpose. It hadn't just hidden the room. It had guarded it, from men who would have burned it to ash. He walked back into the hall, the broken wall yawning behind him. The fallen mirror caught his reflection at a slant. His face looked older, his eyes darker. For an instant, another shape stood beside him, a tall man in an old coat, hands clasped behind his back. Nikita blinked. The figure vanished. Only the mirror stared back, patient, waiting. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the distant hum of the dark sedan returned to the gates, he made his decision. If his great-grandfather had died protecting the truth, then Nikita would not die keeping it buried. Nikita awoke at the table, surrounded by journals, pages, and the ghostly smell of old paper. The lantern beside him had burned down to a trembling ember. His head ached. His dream, if it had been a dream, still clung to him, a man standing by the mirror, whispering without sound. He knew then, the time for hiding was over. He packed the most intact volumes into a satchel, wrapping them in cloth to protect the brittle pages. The rest he left in the hidden chamber, sealing the door loosely with a sheet of plywood. He told himself he'd return for them, but part of him feared he never would. The drive to the city felt endless. Every shadowed car behind him seemed to follow too long. Every stoplight turned red too fast. By the time he reached the narrow streets of the old district, his pulse had become its own drumbeat. He met the journalist in a small cafe, the same one where he had first read the diaries. A quiet man with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, known for stories that cut too close to power. Nikita didn't waste time. He slid the satchel across the table. "Read," he said simply. The journalist opened one of the diaries. "Read a page." Another. His face drained of color. "If this is true," he whispered, "you've just dropped a match into an oil field." Nikita leaned back, his voice steady but hollow. "Then let it burn." He gave the man only part of the collection, enough to prove the truth, not enough to destroy himself completely. He still didn't know who to trust. But the silence that had buried his great-grandfather's truth for 80 years was finally breaking. Days passed, then weeks, and the city began to tremble. First, a cautious article in an independent paper. Old records suggest hidden corruption in cities past. Then another, bolder. Documents reveal lineage of political crimes. The names grew familiar, the same families his great-grandfather had feared. The same names still carved on banks, hospitals, and courthouses. Denials came quickly. Press conferences. Threats. Then investigations. But the evidence was too vast, too detailed. The fire had already spread. At the mansion, Nikita felt the tension shift. Cars still passed the gate, but slower now, observers, not hunters. Once, the caretaker returned and left a single white envelope by the door. Inside were 2 words in shaky handwriting: "Be careful." That night, Nikita walked through the great hall, lantern in hand. The mirror stood upright again, its glass cleaned, its frame gleaming faintly in the flicker of light. For the first time, it reflected clearly, no warping, no shadow behind the glass. He looked into it and saw himself, thinner, older, yes, but steady. Beside his reflection, just for a moment, the outline of another figure appeared, a tall man with tired eyes and a faint, approving nod. His great-grandfather. Nikita didn't flinch. "It's done," he whispered. "They'll know now." The figure faded. Only the mirror remained. Weeks later, arrests followed. Some of the city's most powerful names vanished from their offices, their homes raided under new investigations. The press called it the Koval Files. Nikita refused interviews. He didn't want fame, only silence. But the silence was different now. Not the heavy, haunted stillness of secrecy, but a calm one, the kind that comes after a storm has torn everything bare. In the spring, he planted flowers near the front gate, wild blooms pushing through cracked stone. Beside them, he placed a small plaque of bronze. For those who were silenced. For those who listened anyway. Each morning, he brought fresh flowers. And when evening came, he always ended his walk the same way, standing before the mirror in the great hall. Sometimes he spoke aloud. Sometimes he only stood there, feeling the air hum faintly around him. The mirror, once a barrier, had become a witness. And Nikita understood now that inheritance wasn't property or stone. It was the courage to face the past and the weight of truth that must never again be buried. As twilight poured through the tall windows, his reflection softened in the glass. He smiled faintly and whispered, almost to himself, "Some secrets save us when we share them." Outside, the city lights flickered awake, and the old mansion, at last, exhaled.